Welcome back to Decentralized Nutritional Science in the frame, lens, and context of structural violence and economics. So, nearing this concept initiative's 5 or nearing 6 years of its anniversary since its very beginnings, it's time for us to nevertheless round up together a series of frugal and accessible source of proteins, what everyone needs and certainly what everyone wants. All this presentation is only meant to be as that of an informational stance, as opposed to prescriptive and or instructive dogma per se. So it is always wise for readers to actually curate and explore and experience their own research, put themselves into the test, put themselves into their own self-research and exploration when it comes to trying out different array of alternative nutrition. So this is something that people may be surprised upon, and that is chicken frames. Why chicken frames? Given if one is actually provided with two or three good cooked batches of chicken frames, that may actually be constituting a full enough satiety response, provided that there may be more protein, that there are fat ratios in which that, once again, vary as per to the cut, as well as how the chicken frames are separated during the manufacturing and butchering processes. So the only disadvantages, however, are such few as such that, first of all, poultry in general do contain significantly higher omega-5 and 6 fatty acids compared with other animals or meat-based products. And that, obviously, since we are dealing with the frames, it may be of a laborious exercise, but not as worse if we were to deal with a whole fish, for instance, in which we are going to be covering that in a later section of this presentation. And that another advantages, as one may expect, is the fact that we can cook these chicken frames for their stocks value. All it takes is just boiling water, submerging with a level with several slices of onions, plenty of salt and pepper, apple cider vinegar, and then after it's all well cooked, dash it off with garlic powder just for flavor, and there we go. We have not only sources of good amount of collagenous, gelatinous proteins, but also some appreciable amounts of the stocks that we can use for, well, liquid stocks. This is actually quite a good value, considering that a kilogram of chicken frames can be had for no more than $4, and that kilogram can constitute anyway, in which that vary from, it can be up to 4 or even up to 5 servings, in which that can easily be supplemented onto any savory feature meal. So that is another thing to keep in mind. So next will be something that people don't consider at times, and that is corned beef. One thing that people don't realize is such that there is some appreciable amounts of selenium, as according to the USDA food database, on the American side of things, though, however. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And in terms of the actual protein composition wise, this is where it gets interesting. As according to this website called the International Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, in which they have a database of their own listing of canned goods, corned beef, interestingly enough, has a minimum of 21% protein, but also they have a maximum of no more than 35% of collagenous, quote-unquote, collagenous proteins, in which therefore it is safe to conclude that the mixture of proteins here is actually a good variety of well, at least a diverse, meaningful variety than just lean muscle meats, but also including to that as other connective tissues, as some connective tissues, as well as other gelatinous or collagenous compounds. 7 out of 10 in terms of affordability. So for every 340 gram can, in which that costs anywhere between $2.50 to $3.50, that represents anyway a good value, considering that for as long That is, that one does not fixate or restrict the protein intake to just this alone. Of course, one must always consider mixing and combining with other holistic sources of proteins, not forgetting the ever so important eggs for their crucial nutrients beyond B vitamins, but also the much needed acetylated choline content required to prime the digestion processes, as we've covered many times in the previous in our previous eating video samples as described here. All in all, corned beef is usually not to be recommended, as always, as a sole dietary source of meat proteins, obviously, due to the fact that yes, it still contains some industrial additives and the processing agents, namely surrounding that as the precursors towards heterocyclic amine glycating end products. Should the worst comes to worst, this author would actually recommend eating them just slightly warm as it is, without undergoing much intensive cooking at all. So once again, when it comes to frugality, it is almost impossible for one to actually not consider the immense value, not just caloric value, but micronutrient concentration value behind organ meats. So cooking the chicken necks is as simple affair as simply bring everything to the boil with apple cider vinegar, lemons, garlic, salt and pepper, and simmer no more than 20 minutes. Generally speaking, we should stop whereby the color of the chicken necks, when it's already been cooked, to no more than dark gray. We can also utilize its stocks value as such that these stocks, as with any bones and or connective tissue based meats or tendons and connective tissues in general, actually contains valuable source of glycine, although of course not as much as it is as valuable as buying a small type of gelatin powder per se, but it is nevertheless valuable. However, one thing to keep in mind is, as we've described that in an earlier video, is such that we have to scoop out the PUFA omega N6 fatty acids that has been solidified the longer that we store it in the fridge. So chicken necks are generally, unfortunately, may seem a little less affordable when compared with other frugal sources of proteins as featured here in this presentation for a number of reasons, as such that firstly, the protein to fat ratio may actually vary as accordingly to depending on how the meats are being manufactured and prepared, in which it obviously varies from cut to cut and from batches to batches. Some packaging and batches may feature more fat ratio to proteins than others. What is shown here on the screen is a macro compositions. However, these macro compositions per 100 grams is only assuming that it is edible portions only. Generally speaking, when it comes to the short dating pricing opportunities, this can be seen anywhere between $2.50 to $3.50 per any given kilograms. And then following to that, we have the ox hearts. Ox hearts is probably more rewarding to acquire because of the fact that it is generally speaking, we can see that they're actually a lot more denser and thicker, as such that there is more muscle content within it. So yes, arguably speaking, ox hearts can also be as lean, if not leaner than that of chicken hearts, depending on how it is prepared at the butcher side of things. So keeping that in mind, but nevertheless, high amount of iron and appreciable amount of protein and the CoQ10 side of things. Once again, never wise to actually cook this on a dry heat. Always remember that we are trying to maintain the wet cooking methodology at all times. Ox hearts in general are and can be quite affordable, ranging anywhere between $3 to $4.50 per kilograms. Once again, considering its high protein to fat ratio, making this one of the more viable choices for those who are opting for a more leaner cattle-based meat source of proteins in that regard. Once again, for more cooking procedures and our examples, please refer to the previous video as disclosed earlier. So next thing that's also easy to cook is chicken hearts. Chicken hearts in general have slightly more fat contents, but a convenient form nevertheless of CoQ10 amount within it. Next to that as ox hearts. However, once again, due to its being a small organ, it is always wise, once again, to limit the cooking time to no more than 4 minutes of very intensive cooking. Once again, wet cooking methodology with some presence of liquids, fluids, or stocks with vitamin C, with apple cider vinegar, or just a brief squeeze of lemon, salt and pepper, with our vegetables, and that's it. That is that offers valuable amount of CoQ10 and some appreciable amounts of protein. Chicken hearts can be just as affordable as ox hearts, however, slightly less so because of the fact that since we are dealing with smaller organ weights, well, as per to each given animal, one must have to therefore consider a slightly greater raw weight needed per serve to constitute the same satiety response and or to reach the same macronutrient value as that of the cattle or beef ox hearts, for instance, in this case. Chicken gizzards are pretty much a muscular gland to actually digest and grind together the food in mechanical motions. One of the interesting things about gizzards is that it contains unappreciable, but unfortunately may not be in large meaningful amount, as that of key minerals, zinc, copper, and notably to that as selenium. But once again, unfortunately, not as meaningfully attractive as that of just one Brazil nut per se. Of course, Brazil nut remains enviable, but extremely expensive. Nevertheless, chicken gizzards, their very advantages is such that they're actually very lean, one of the leanest organ meats around, and that not only that, they're also very, very easy to cook. On the downside, however, is that they can be quite delicate as such that it would not be wise for us to actually cook them in a dry heating environment. Once again, as what this author has pretty much emphasized and recommended over the years from the parent manuscript as well as the technical accompanying manuscript data, glycation, and products is such that the wet cooking methodology is usually, generally speaking, the safest way to cook these delicate organ meats. So putting a little bit of fluids and or liquids such as other stocks with a bit of apple cider vinegar, garlic powder, it can be done as quickly as just 3 minutes in a microwave on high, and that is that. We have ourselves a reasonably well cooked chicken gizzards. One thing to know about chicken gizzards is such that they're, at least in Australia, we often call them as chicken giblets, so that's one thing to keep in mind. They're generally quite affordable, however, their short data opportunity wise can be a little bit more rarer at times than compared to other organ meats per se. And now this is a mini special section on livers: the chicken, beef, sheep, and lamb. Generally speaking, all of them are excellent, perhaps nature's strongest source of bioavailable retinoic acid that cannot be found, arguably and or subjectively speaking, as anywhere else, anywhere throughout our current realms and understanding of nutritional science. The largest amount of vitamin A will be most commonly be residing within the lamb side of livers, the least being towards the chicken side of livers. And so that leaves the beef and the sheep somewhere in the middle, in between. When it comes to taste profile-wise, for those who are not really accustomed to the taste and texture of livers in particular, they may be wise to actually start with, once again, this may be quite subjective, to actually start with chicken livers in such a manner that the liver pate should not be overcooked. The key here is getting the fine, right balance between medium and medium rare. And this is a lot more difficult than it really seems. And this should also motivate readers to, again, pursue and to experiment at what timing is best for, depending on the species of the organ meats. So the quickest to cook under these authors' own experiences over the years will be that as chicken livers. Why? Because we can see that the actual mass of each liver as the organ is quite small, in which that's all there is per animal, compared to that as beef, sheep, and or lamb. The trick here is to actually utilize quite a few moderate amounts of cream-like fatty sources. That is correct. Fat sources such as creams and butters are among arguably the best source of fluids to submerge and to mix together throughout the refrigeration and or the marination process with one small onion, no more than 100 grams worth, with salt, pepper, and garlic powder. And that's that. Briefly cook it under very high heat, but turning the heat down right away, and just leave it on a very, very gentle simmer for no more than 2 or 3 minutes, in which this is an interval time for us to check the doneness to make sure that the inside of the meat should be pink and there should still be some juice. However, such a juice should not be overly bloody, but it should not be brown either. Once again, this is a lot harder than it seems. And this is also where, and such is arguably where both fun and challenge coincides well together when it comes to understanding and of all things respecting the ancestral value of organ meats in particular. In general, livers generally hovering more or less around about $4 to $4.50 per kilograms, irrespective of the species. However, some retailers and butchers may actually cost upwards towards that at $6 or even $7 per kilograms, even amidst mainstream stores. So hence, it pays for one to scalp around for other alternative grocery stores. Short-dated pricing-wise, interestingly, chicken liver seems to be the more generally seen amongst mainstream retailers and supermarkets. However, others, such as lamb, beef, or sheep, remains unfortunately rare. In the next part, we will discuss the next remainder viable source of proteins there is that we can actually consider. We will have to also consider the not so good sources that this author would like to kindly share throughout his 5 or nearing that as 6 years and ongoing of personal subsistence amidst nutritional frugality, at the very least in the context of cyclical keto with intermittent fasting regimens and a principle. Whatever stance or opinions that readers may or may not have, they're nevertheless encouraged to actually pursue further research at their own ends, and most of all things to self-authenticate what they are willing to therefore experiment, as well as sacrifice their prior abroad sentiments and or preconceived notions surrounding nutritional frugality. Because after all, this is, once again, nutritional science, decentralized nutritional science in the frame, lens, and context of inaccessibility and economics. And once again, thank you for your partaking viewerships and discussion amidst the internet's least visited independent thoughts on wellness and decentralized nutritional science. Live it forward, and thank you for watching.